My name is Sienna, and at 62, I've learned that retirement should be peaceful after 35 years of teaching America's children. I had a good pension, modest savings, and a home that was paid for. When my husband Frank passed, my son Brian started visiting more often. At first, I was grateful for his attention, but then I found credit card statements with purchases I never made. I never thought my own flesh and blood would betray me like this. Before I share how my own son betrayed me, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that subscribe button if you've ever trusted someone who didn't deserve it. I spent my entire adult life as a teacher at Lincoln Elementary School in Portland. For 35 years, I shaped young minds, wiped tears, celebrated small victories, and watched my students grow into amazing adults. Some of them still send me cards during the holidays, which always makes me smile. Teaching was never about the money, but I was careful with my finances, knowing that someday I would need to rely on what I had saved. Frank and I were married for 40 years before his heart attack took him 2 years ago. He worked as an electrician, and between our two incomes, we managed to pay off our modest 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood. We weren't rich by any means, but we were comfortable. Frank always handled our finances, but he made sure I understood everything about our accounts and investments. "Just in case," he would say. I never thought that just in case would come so soon. After Frank's funeral, I took stock of my financial situation. I had a teacher's pension of $3,800 monthly, and we had managed to save $240,000 over the years. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough for me to live comfortably if I was careful. I could pay my bills, maintain my home, and even travel occasionally to visit friends or family. My son Brian is 38 now. When he was a child, we were so close. He would follow Frank around the house, learning how to fix things, his little hands eager to help. He had his father's blue eyes and my curly hair and a smile that could brighten even the rainiest Portland day. As he grew older, our relationship remained strong. He would call me between classes in college just to chat about his day, or ask for my potato salad recipe. But something changed when Brian hit his mid-20s. He struggled to keep jobs, always finding reasons why his bosses were unfair, or his coworkers were difficult. Frank and I tried to guide him gently, but he seemed to resent our advice. When he met Allison at 28, I was hopeful. She was practical and ambitious, working as a dental hygienist. I thought perhaps she would help Brian find stability. They married within a year and soon had 2 beautiful children. Noah is 7 now, with his father's charm and endless energy. Lily is 5, quiet and thoughtful, with a talent for drawing that reminds me of myself at her age. Being a grandmother was one of the greatest joys of my life. I would babysit whenever they needed baked cookies with the kids and read them the same stories I once read to their father. Despite having a family, Brian's financial situation remained precarious. When they found a small house they wanted to buy, Frank and I helped with the down payment. $20,000 from our savings seemed worth it to give our grandchildren a stable home. Brian promised to pay us back, but Frank waved it off. "Family helps family," he said. After Frank died, I noticed a change in Brian's behavior. His visits became more frequent, sometimes 3 or 4 times a week. At first, I was touched by his concern, thinking he was checking on me because he was worried about my grief. He started asking questions about my finances, which seemed natural enough. He would say things like, "Mom, are you sure you're managing okay without Dad?" Or, "Have you thought about what you're going to do with Dad's life insurance money?" The questions gradually became more specific. How much is your pension exactly? Where do you keep your important documents? Have you updated your will since Dad died? Each time I answered honestly, not seeing any reason for concern. "Mom, you should be enjoying your life more," he would say while looking around my modest living room. "You worked hard all those years." Why not treat yourself to something nice? When I would tell him I was happy with what I had, he would shake his head as if I just didn't understand. Then came the suggestions about my accounts. Mom, what if something happens to you? What if you fall and can't get to the bank? You should add me to your accounts just for safety. Dad would want to know someone was looking out for you. I hesitated at first. Frank had always taught me to be careful with financial matters. But Brian was persistent, and my loneliness after losing Frank made me more vulnerable than I realized. My arthritis was getting worse, making it painful to drive sometimes. I had also experienced some minor memory lapses, nothing serious, but enough to make me worry about the future. More than anything, I feared losing my connection to my grandchildren. Noah and Lily were the lights of my life, especially after Frank was gone. Their visits gave me something to look forward to, a reason to keep my cookie jar full, and my craft supplies organized. So despite my initial reluctance, I eventually agreed to add Brian to one of my checking accounts, the one I used for household expenses. Just for emergencies, I told him firmly. Just in case. He agreed, squeezing my hand in a way that reminded me so much of his father. I didn't realize then that I had just opened the door to a betrayal I could never have imagined. The first sign that something was wrong came about 3 months after I added Brian to my household account. I kept $200 in cash in my wallet for small expenses tucked behind my driver's license. One evening, after Brian and his family had visited for Sunday dinner, I opened my wallet to pay for a prescription and discovered the money was gone. I called Brian, confused and concerned. "Did you borrow some money from my wallet?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. "I seem to be missing $200. "Mom, you probably spent it and forgot," he said, his voice tinged with a patience that felt somehow patronizing. "You bought pizza for the kids on Tuesday, remember? And you insisted on paying for all our groceries when we took you shopping." I did remember those expenses, but I had used my debit card for them. Still, I found myself doubting my own recollection. Had I withdrawn cash and forgotten? Was I becoming forgetful like my mother had in her final years? "You're probably right," I conceded. "I must have forgotten." A week later, I noticed several $50 ATM withdrawals on my bank statement that I couldn't recall making. When I mentioned this to Brian, he had an explanation ready. "Oh, I took a little cash out to pay your gardener," he said. "Remember, Jose was going to trim those big branches that were hanging over your roof. You asked me to handle it while you were at your doctor's appointment." I did remember discussing the tree branches, but not asking Brian to handle the payment. Jose usually charged me $30 for yard work, not $50, and I preferred to pay him directly. Still, it seemed plausible enough, and I let it go. Brian's presence in my life continued to increase. He insisted on driving me to my appointments, claiming he was worried about my arthritis affecting my ability to drive safely. "I don't want you in pain, Mom," he would say, and it was hard to argue with his apparent concern. He began taking my mail, saying he would help me organize it. "There's so much junk mail these days, and those scammers target seniors. I'll sort through it and make sure you don't miss anything important." One day, while sitting next to me at my computer, he noticed me struggling to remember my online banking password. "Let me help you update that to something more secure," he offered. Before I knew it, he had changed my password to something easier to remember, but insisted on typing it in himself whenever I needed to check my accounts. My best friend Margaret was the first to express concern. We've been friends since our first year teaching together 40 years ago, and she knows me better than almost anyone. After observing Brian's behavior during a lunch visit, she pulled me aside. "Sienna, don't you think Brian is being a little too involved in your finances?" she asked cautiously. "Frank always said you were perfectly capable of managing your money." "He's just being helpful," I defended, though a flicker of unease passed through me. "Since Frank died, he's worried about me being alone. Margaret pressed her lips together, but didn't push further. "Just be careful," she said finally. "You worked too hard for your pension to take any risks with it." My brother Thomas, who lives in Arizona, called around this time. We weren't as close as I would have liked due to the distance, but we spoke at least twice a month. During our call, he asked how I was managing my finances after Frank's death. "Brian has been helping me," I told him. "He's been so attentive since his father passed." There was a pause on the line before Thomas responded. "Just make sure you're keeping an eye on everything, Sienna. I'm not saying Brian would do anything wrong, but I've heard stories about adult children taking advantage of their parents after one spouse dies." I brushed off his concern, slightly offended on Brian's behalf. "He's not taking advantage of me. He's my son." Then came the incident at the grocery store that should have been my wake-up call. I was checking out with a cart full of groceries when my debit card was declined. I felt my face flush with embarrassment as people waited in line behind me. "There must be some mistake," I told the cashier. "I know I have money in that account." I called Brian from the store and he arrived 20 minutes later, concerned and apologetic. "It's a bank error," he explained as he paid for my groceries with his own card. "These things happen all the time. I'll call them tomorrow and get it straightened out." On the drive home, he made a suggestion that in retrospect was the next step in his plan. "Mom, this is exactly why I've been worried. These banking errors are stressful for you. Why don't you let me handle all the finances? I can make sure your bills are paid on time, and you won't have to deal with these kinds of problems anymore." His offer seemed so sincere, his blue eyes, so like his father's, filled with what I interpreted as concern. I agreed to think about it, still trusting that his intentions were good. Janet, a former colleague who had retired a year before me, noticed Brian's controlling behavior when she stopped by one afternoon while he was there. After he left, she shared her observations. "Sienna, I couldn't help but notice how Brian seemed to answer questions for you," she said carefully. "And he was very quick to take that phone call about your insurance." "Is everything okay?" "He's just helping out," I said, the explanation sounding rehearsed even to my own ears. Janet looked skeptical. "My sister went through something similar with her son after her husband died. It started with helping out and ended with her nearly losing her house." Despite these warnings, I continued to trust Brian. I dismissed Margaret's concerns as overprotectiveness, rationalized Brian's behavior as simple concern for my well-being, and tried not to think about how uncomfortable I felt when he would intercept phone calls or insist on driving me places. I was also afraid of losing my connection to my grandchildren if I confronted Brian about my growing unease. Noah and Lily were the brightest spots in my life after losing Frank. The thought of not seeing their faces light up when they ran through my front door was unbearable. But then came the day I found an unfamiliar credit card statement in a stack of mail that Brian had forgotten to take with him after a visit. It had my name on it, but was being sent to Brian's address. When I opened it, I felt sick to my stomach. There were thousands of dollars in charges for electronics, clothing, and restaurants I had never visited. As I stared at the statement in my hand, I knew I could no longer ignore the warning signs. Something was very wrong, and my son was at the center of it. The discovery of that unfamiliar credit card statement was just the beginning. With shaking hands, I called the credit card company, claiming I needed to update my address. The customer service representative was helpful, confirming that my son had opened the account 6 months ago with my Social Security number. When I asked about other accounts, she revealed there were 3 additional credit cards in my name, all being sent to Brian's address. "Would you like me to put a fraud alert on your accounts, ma'am?" the representative asked. "Not yet," I replied, my mind racing. "I need to gather more information first." After hanging up, I drove to the post office, something I hadn't done in months since Brian had insisted on handling my mail. I spoke with the clerk and discovered Brian had filled out a mail forwarding form in my name, redirecting all my mail to his address. I had the form canceled immediately. Next, I went to my bank. The teller's expression changed from professional courtesy to concern as I reviewed my accounts. There were dozens of transfers from my savings to accounts I didn't recognize, totaling nearly $60,000 over the past 8 months. Mrs. Peterson, these transfers were authorized using your online banking credentials, the teller explained gently. Did you approve these transactions? No. I whispered, the reality of what my son had done beginning to sink in. No, I didn't. That evening, I confronted Brian when he came by supposedly to check on me. I laid out the credit card statements and bank records on my kitchen table, the same table where we'd shared countless family meals. What is this, Brian? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. His expression shifted from surprise to a practiced concern that I now recognized as fake. Mom, we talked about this. You agreed to let me manage your finances, remember? You said it was getting too confusing for you. I never agreed to you opening credit cards in my name or transferring my savings, I replied. Yes, you did. His voice took on a patronizing tone. You must have forgotten. You've been having a lot of memory issues lately. Remember last month when you couldn't find your glasses and they were on top of your head? Or when you put the milk in the pantry instead of the refrigerator? Those minor incidents had happened, but they were normal absent-mindedness, not signs of significant memory loss. Still, Brian was so convincing, so confident in his version of events, that for a moment, I questioned my own recollection. Allison was there when we discussed it. Brian continued, pulling out his phone to call his wife. When she arrived 30 minutes later, she backed up his story completely. Sienna, we're worried about you, Allison said, reaching across the table to pat my hand. These memory lapses seem to be getting worse. Brian is just trying to protect you and your assets. I looked from Brian to Allison, these people I had trusted, who were now gaslighting me in my own home. Something hardened inside me, a seed of resolve taking root. But I wasn't ready to confront them fully, not yet. I needed to understand the extent of what they had done. Maybe you're right, I conceded, hating the relief that washed over their faces. I'm just confused. Let's talk about this another time. Over the next few weeks, I discovered how Brian had systematically isolated me. He had been telling other family members that I was becoming confused and struggling with daily tasks. My niece Angela called from Seattle, concerned about reports of my declining cognitive state. My cousin Ruth stopped including me in family event planning because Brian had told her I found it too stressful. Visits with my grandchildren became less frequent. Phone calls to their house were often answered by Allison, who would make excuses about why Noah and Lily couldn't come to the phone. They're doing homework, or they're already in bed, even when I called in the early afternoon. Brian insisted on accompanying me to my regular checkup with Dr. Matthews, a physician I'd trusted for 15 years. In the examination room, Brian spoke over me, describing memory issues and confusion I wasn't experiencing. She often forgets conversations we've had, Brian told the doctor. She's been misplacing things, getting dates mixed up. We're really concerned. Doctor. Matthews listened patiently, then asked Brian to step outside so he could examine me privately. Once we were alone, he looked at me seriously. Sienna, are these memory issues as severe as your son describes? No, I said firmly. I forget things occasionally, like anyone my age, but nothing significant. Dr. Matthews, I'm worried that Brian is trying to make me seem incompetent for his own purposes. Dr. Matthews conducted a thorough cognitive assessment, which I passed with flying colors. There's no evidence of any significant cognitive impairment, he told Brian when he invited him back in. Sienna's memory and decision-making abilities are well within the normal range for someone her age. I didn't miss the flash of disappointment on Brian's face before he masked it with concern. Are you sure maybe we should get a second opinion? That's your right, Dr. Matthews replied coolly, but I stand by my assessment. As we left the office, Brian was unusually quiet. I pretended not to notice, but inside, my suspicions were confirmed. My son had been hoping for a diagnosis that would give him control over my affairs. The most shocking discovery came when I found paperwork in my home office that I had never seen before. While Brian was busy in the kitchen making tea, I quickly photographed documents showing attempts to redirect my pension deposits to an account I didn't recognize. There was also a partially completed power of attorney form with what appeared to be my forged signature. With trembling hands, I put everything back exactly as I had found it. I needed time to process what I had discovered and figure out what to do next. My son, my own child, was systematically stealing my identity and attempting to take control of my finances. The betrayal was almost too enormous to comprehend. The moment everything shattered beyond repair happened on a Tuesday afternoon. Brian had stopped by unexpectedly, claiming he needed to check a leak under my kitchen sink. I watched as he moved around my kitchen with the easy familiarity of someone who had grown up in this house, making small talk about Noah's baseball game and Lily's dance recital. As I turned to get us some iced tea from the refrigerator, I saw him quickly slip my wallet from my purse on the counter. By the time I turned back, he was examining the contents, removing my credit and debit cards. "What are you doing?" I asked, setting down the glasses with a thud that sent tea sloshing over the rims. Brian didn't even try to hide what he was doing. Instead, he looked at me with an expression of such condescension that it made my blood run cold. "Mom, we talked about this," he said, pocketing my cards. "You can't be trusted with these anymore. You're spending too much, and you're getting confused about your finances." "Give those back!" I demanded, my voice shaking with a combination of fear and anger. "Those are my cards. You have no right." "Your pension belongs to me now," he said, his voice hardening. "I'm the one taking care of you, making sure you don't waste all your money. You don't need all that money at your age. What are you saving it for anyway? It's going to be mine eventually." In that moment, I saw my son clearly for perhaps the first time in years. The loving boy I had raised was gone, replaced by a man who saw me not as his mother, but as a resource to be exploited. The realization was like ice water in my veins. "Your father would be ashamed of you," I said quietly. Something flashed in Brian's eyes, rage or perhaps guilt, before he composed himself. "Dad would understand that I'm protecting you from yourself. You're not thinking clearly anymore." "Get out of my house," I whispered. "Mom, don't be dramatic. I'm doing this for your own good." "Get out," I repeated louder this time. Brian sighed as if dealing with an unreasonable child. "I'll come back when you've calmed down. You'll see that this is for the best." After he left, I collapsed into a kitchen chair, my entire body shaking. The betrayal was complete now. My son had taken my cards and declared that my pension, the money I had earned through decades of teaching, belonged to him. And behind his actions, I now understood, was his wife, Allison. She had never liked our modest lifestyle, always pushing for more expensive vacations, a bigger house, newer cars. My retirement funds must have seemed like an easy solution to their financial problems. The emotional devastation was overwhelming. I had given Brian everything a mother could give a son: love, support, encouragement, financial help. I had welcomed his wife into our family, adored their children, and never asked for anything in return except love. And this was how he repaid me. I questioned everything about myself as a mother. Had I spoiled him, failed to teach him proper values? Was this somehow my fault? Frank and I had always tried to raise him to be honest and hardworking. Where had we gone wrong? Beyond the emotional pain was genuine fear. Without access to my accounts, how would I pay my bills? Buy groceries? What if Brian took everything? At 62, it was too late to go back to work and rebuild my savings. The specter of financial ruin and even homelessness loomed before me. I spent days barely leaving my bedroom curtains-drawn phone unanswered. But on the fourth day after Brian took my cards, something shifted. I was looking through an old photo album and came across a picture of myself as a young teacher, 22 years old, and standing proudly in front of my first classroom. I remembered that young woman's determination, her independence, her belief that she could make a difference in the world. "What happened to her?" I whispered to the photograph. The young woman in that picture wouldn't have hidden in her bedroom. She would have fought back. That same evening, my brother Thomas called. I had been avoiding his calls, ashamed to admit what was happening. But this time, I answered. "Sienna, what's going on?" he asked immediately. "I've called 6 times in 3 days. Something about his concerned voice broke through my walls. I told him everything, the words pouring out of me in a rush of pain and fear. I expected judgment or disbelief, but instead, Thomas listened quietly until I finished. "I'm booking a flight right now," he said, his voice tight with anger. "But Sienna, before I get there, you need to call your bank. Today. Right now." "What can they do?" I asked hopelessly. "More than you think. This is financial abuse and it's illegal. Promise me you'll call them today." "I promise," I said, feeling a small spark of hope for the first time in days. After hanging up with Thomas, I called Margaret. Like Thomas, she listened without interrupting as I confessed everything. "Oh, Sienna," she said when I finished. "I'm so sorry. I knew something wasn't right, but I never imagined it was this bad." "I don't know what to do," I admitted. "Yes, you do," Margaret said firmly. "You just need help doing it. My son Alan is a lawyer, remember? He specializes in elder law. Let me call him right now." Within an hour, Margaret had arranged for Alan to meet with me the following morning. She also insisted on coming over immediately, bringing dinner and staying the night. Just in case Brian decides to show up uninvited. That night, with Margaret sleeping in my guest room, I also called an elder abuse hotline I found online. The counselor who answered was kind but practical, giving me specific steps to take and reassuring me that what I was experiencing was not uncommon and definitely not my fault. "Financial elder abuse is more common than people realize," she told me, "especially when it's family members. You're not alone, and you're doing the right thing by reaching out for help." Before going to bed, I gathered every financial document I could find, making copies of statements showing unauthorized transactions. I found old bills with my signature and compared them to the forged signature on the power of attorney document, highlighting the obvious differences. I even discovered that I had accidentally left my phone's voice recorder running during one of my conversations with Brian, capturing his admission that he had taken my cards against my will. As I organized this evidence, a plan began to form. I would not be a victim anymore. I would fight for what was mine, for the security I had earned through decades of hard work. Brian had underestimated me, assuming that my age made me weak and pliable. He was about to learn how wrong he was. "Enough is enough," I said to myself as I finally went to bed. For the first time in days, I slept soundly without nightmares. Early the next morning, Margaret drove me to meet with her son, Alan, at his law office. As we sat in his tastefully decorated conference room, I spread out the evidence I had collected. Alan reviewed everything carefully, taking notes and occasionally asking clarifying questions. "Mrs. Peterson, what your son has done constitutes several crimes," he said finally, his professional demeanor not quite hiding his anger on my behalf. "Identity theft, fraud, elder financial abuse, and forgery, just to name a few. We need to take immediate action to protect your remaining assets and begin the process of recovering what was stolen. Alan outlined a three-pronged approach: contact the bank to freeze all accounts and report the fraud, file a police report, and seek a temporary restraining order against Brian. The last suggestion made my heart ache, but I nodded in agreement. This was no time for sentimentality. After our meeting with Alan, Margaret drove me directly to my bank. The young woman at the customer service desk seemed skeptical when I explained the situation, her eyes darting uncertainly between me and Margaret, as if trying to determine if I was truly competent. "Perhaps we should speak with a manager," Margaret suggested firmly when the representative mentioned needing to verify these allegations before taking any action. Mr. Reynolds, the bank manager, was a different story entirely. A man about my age with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner, he listened attentively as I explained what had happened, examining the documents I provided. "Mrs. Peterson, I've seen this kind of elder financial abuse before," he said gravely. "We take these matters very seriously. Let's look at your accounts right now and see exactly what's been happening." What followed was a horrifying revelation of just how systematically Brian had been draining my accounts. Mr. Reynolds pulled up records showing dozens of transfers, ATM withdrawals, and electronic payments that I had never authorized. He also found evidence that Brian had attempted to change the direct deposit information for my pension payments. "Based on what I'm seeing, we need to take immediate action," Mr. Reynolds said. "First, we'll freeze all your joint accounts and revoke your son's access to everything. Then we'll flag those fraudulent credit applications and begin the process of disputing all unauthorized transactions." "Can you really do all that?" I asked, a wave of relief washing over me. "Not only can we do it, but we are obligated to report suspected elder financial abuse," he assured me. "We'll also cooperate fully with any police investigation." By the time we left the bank 3 hours later, Mr. Reynolds had helped me open new accounts that only I could access, ordered new cards to be expedited to me, and provided a complete record of all fraudulent activity for my attorney. He had also assigned a special fraud team to my case and provided me with direct contact numbers for himself and the fraud department. "This will take some time to fully resolve, Mrs. Peterson," he warned me, "but we're going to make sure your funds are protected from now on." The following day, Thomas arrived from Arizona, bringing with him a fierce protectiveness that reminded me so much of Frank. Together with Alan, we went to the police station to file a report. The detective who took my statement was thorough and compassionate, taking copies of all my evidence and assuring me that they would investigate fully. "Financial crimes against seniors are taken very seriously in this jurisdiction," the detective told us, "especially when it involves family members abusing their position of trust." With the police report filed, Alan was able to secure a temporary restraining order preventing Brian from coming to my home or contacting me directly. It was a necessary step, but signing those papers was one of the hardest things I've ever done. What mother ever imagines needing legal protection from her own child? While these official proceedings were underway, Brian was not sitting idle. His calls became increasingly frequent and angry after he discovered his access to my accounts had been revoked. "What have you done?" he demanded when I answered one of his calls before we had the restraining order. "I can't get into your accounts." "They're not your accounts, Brian. They never were." "You can't manage on your own," he shouted. "You need me. Who's been helping you all this time?" "Helping me?" I asked, my voice steady despite my pounding heart. "Is that what you call stealing $60,000 from my savings, opening credit cards in my name, trying to redirect my pension?" There was a brief silence before his tone changed completely. "Mom, you're confused. I was just organizing your finances. Everything I did was for you." "Don't call again, Brian. My attorney will be in touch." When phone calls didn't work, Brian showed up at my house. Thankfully, Thomas was there and refused to let him in, informing him of the restraining order through the locked door while I called the police. Brian left before they arrived, but not before shouting threats about never seeing my grandchildren again. "He's bluffing," Thomas assured me, though we both knew that keeping me from Noah and Lily would be the cruelest punishment Brian could devise. Brian also attempted to turn other family members against me, calling my niece Angela and telling her I was having a mental breakdown and making wild accusations because of advancing dementia. Fortunately, Angela called me directly to check on me, giving me the opportunity to tell her the truth and direct her to speak with Thomas for confirmation. Despite the pain of Brian's betrayal, I found my emotional state improving as I took action. Anger began to replace the paralyzing sadness I had felt initially. There was something empowering about fighting back, about refusing to be victimized. I was standing up for myself in a way that made me feel stronger with each passing day. My support network expanded beyond Thomas and Margaret. I reconnected with former teaching colleagues who rallied around me with meals, companionship, and fierce loyalty. Thomas extended his visit from the planned 3 days to 2 weeks, helping me change my locks and install a simple security system. My neighbors, once informed of the situation, created an informal neighborhood watch, keeping an eye on my house and reporting any sightings of Brian's car. I also joined a support group for victims of elder abuse, where I met others who had experienced similar betrayals, many from their own children. Their stories helped me understand that what had happened wasn't my fault, and that recovery, both financial and emotional, was possible. Through all of this, I kept thinking about the moment when Brian would truly understand the consequences of his actions. The bank manager's words, "He doesn't own a single account here anymore," became a mantra of sorts, a promise that justice would eventually be served. 2 weeks after I froze my accounts and filed the police report, Brian made his fatal mistake. He walked into my bank confident and entitled, demanding access to his mother's accounts because she was mentally incompetent and he needed to handle her finances. I wasn't there when it happened, but Mr. Reynolds called me immediately afterward. "Mrs. Peterson, your son just tried to access your accounts," he said, a note of satisfaction in his voice. When our teller refused, he insisted on speaking to me. I informed him that our fraud department had flagged all your accounts due to unauthorized activity and that he no longer had any access whatsoever. "What did he say?" I asked, picturing Brian's face as his schemes collapsed around him. "He became quite agitated, claiming you were confused and making things up. That's when I told him, 'Sir, your mother isn't confused at all. She's been working with our fraud department and the police. You don't own a single account here anymore.'" Mr. Reynolds continued, "He caused quite a scene, threatened to sue the bank, demanded to see your power of attorney paperwork, which of course we don't have because it was forged. Security had to escort him out." I felt a complex mixture of emotions, vindication, sadness, and a strange sense of relief. "Thank you for calling me," I said. "We take elder financial abuse very seriously, Mrs. Peterson," Mr. Reynolds replied. "I've already notified the detective handling your case about this incident." The detective called me an hour later. Brian's public meltdown at the bank had strengthened their case considerably, as multiple employees had witnessed his attempts to fraudulently access my accounts. The investigation had also uncovered the full extent of his crimes: $87,000 in unauthorized transfers from my savings and checking accounts, plus $42,000 in credit card fraud. 3 days later, Brian was arrested for elder financial abuse and fraud. The police allowed him to turn himself in, rather than being handcuffed at his home in front of my grandchildren, a small mercy I had requested, despite everything he had done. Allison called me the same day, hysterical and angry. "How could you do this to your own son?" she demanded. "He was just trying to help you." "Allison, we both know that's not true," I replied calmly. "The police have evidence that you were involved too. The credit card statements show purchases at stores you frequent, restaurants near your workplace. The transfers went into your joint account." "I didn't know," she insisted, her voice suddenly uncertain. "Brian handled all that. I just thought he was helping you organize your finances. I didn't believe her for a second, but I also knew that my grandchildren needed at least one parent available to them. Tell that to the police, Allison. But know this, I will be seeking visitation rights with Noah and Lily. They're innocent in all this, and I love them very much. She hung up without responding. The consequences rippled through my extended family. Noah and Lily temporarily stayed with Allison's parents, who called me with their own confusion and distress. I explained the situation as gently as I could, emphasizing that I wanted to maintain a relationship with my grandchildren, despite what had happened with their parents. Brian's sister Laura, who lives in California, initially called to berate me for having her brother arrested. "How could you do this to him?" she demanded. "He has children." "Laura, do you really think I would have Brian arrested without cause?" I asked her. "He stole over $100,000 from me. He tried to take control of my pension. He forged my signature on legal documents." Her angry certainty faltered. "But why would he do that?" I emailed her copies of the bank statements, credit card bills, and police report. 2 days later, she called back in tears, apologizing and offering her support. Not everyone in the family was so understanding. Frank's brother and his wife decided Brian must have been provoked somehow and stopped speaking to me entirely. The most painful aspect was the limited access to my grandchildren. The courts arranged supervised visitation while the case was ongoing, which meant seeing Noah and Lily in a sterile government building under the watchful eyes of social workers. Their confusion and anxiety were evident, and explaining the situation in an age-appropriate way was one of the hardest things I've ever done. On the financial front, there was better news. The bank reversed most of the fraudulent charges and restored access to my accounts. The credit card companies, after initial resistance, eventually removed the unauthorized accounts and charges from my credit report. My credit score, which had plummeted due to Brian's actions, slowly began to recover. Mr. Reynolds helped me implement new financial protections, two-factor authentication on all accounts, credit freezes with all 3 major bureaus, and regular account monitoring services. "We want to make sure this can never happen again," he assured me. The court proceedings moved more slowly than I had hoped. Brian initially proclaimed his innocence, but as the evidence mounted, his attorney negotiated a plea deal. He would plead guilty to reduced charges in exchange for a lighter sentence, full restitution, and mandatory financial counseling. The restraining order became permanent with modifications to allow for the possibility of family counseling in the future if deemed appropriate by mental health professionals. The judge also ordered supervised visitation with my grandchildren to continue with evaluations every 3 months to determine if restrictions could gradually be eased. When Brian stood in court and admitted his guilt, I felt no triumph, only a profound sadness. But I also felt something unexpected relief. The truth was finally acknowledged not just by me or the authorities, but by Brian himself. It was a first step, however small, towards some kind of resolution. The months following Brian's conviction were a time of slow, painful healing. My initial struggle with the decision to press charges gave way to a quiet certainty that I had done the right thing, not just for myself, but for Brian too. Without consequences, his behavior would have continued and worsened, possibly affecting others beyond me. I began seeing a therapist specializing in family trauma, working through the complex emotions of being betrayed by my own child. Some days, the pain felt as fresh as when I first discovered what Brian had done. Other days brought a measure of peace and perspective. "You didn't cause this, you couldn't control it, and you couldn't cure it," my therapist reminded me often. His choices were his own. Rebuilding my sense of independence became a priority. I took classes at the senior center on using smartphones and computers, determined never again to be dependent on others for managing my technology. I joined a women's investment club, learning more about financial management than I had known in all my previous years. I found unexpected purpose through volunteering with an elder abuse prevention program at the local community center. Sharing my story with other seniors helped them recognize warning signs I had missed and gave me a sense that some good could come from my painful experience. If my story helps even one person avoid what I went through, then telling it is worth it, I told the groups I spoke to. My relationship with my grandchildren evolved through the supervised visitation program. Initially, Noah and Lily were confused and hesitant, clearly affected by whatever they had been told about the situation. Our first few visits were awkward and strained. "Why can't we come to your house anymore, Grandma?" Noah asked during our second visit. "Dad says you're mad at him." "I'm not mad at your dad," I explained, choosing my words carefully. "We had a disagreement about some grown-up things, and right now we need some special rules about when we can see each other. But I love you and Lily very much, and that will never change." Over time, as the children became accustomed to the new arrangement, our visits became more natural. I brought simple crafts and games we could enjoy together in the visitation center. We read books, drew pictures, and gradually rebuilt our connection. An unexpected ally emerged in Allison's mother, Patricia. Though initially distant when the case first broke, she reached out to me after a few months. "I don't understand everything that happened," she said during our first awkward phone call. "But Noah and Lily need their grandmother. They miss you." Patricia began facilitating additional contact beyond the court-ordered visitations, sending me their artwork, and occasionally arranging video calls when Allison wasn't home. It wasn't ideal, but it was a bridge to the children I loved so dearly. With Patricia's help, I created new traditions with Noah and Lily. Since I couldn't invite them to my home for Christmas, I arranged a special Grandma Day at a local hotel the week before, decorating a small tree in my room and exchanging gifts in the hotel's restaurant. "This is even better than regular Christmas," Lily whispered as we shared hot chocolate. "We get 2 Christmases now." My personal transformation continued in ways I hadn't anticipated. I enrolled in financial literacy courses at the community college, determined to master skills Frank had always handled and that Brian had tried to steal from me. I joined advocacy groups for elder rights, speaking at legislative hearings about the need for stronger protections against financial exploitation. The experience changed me in fundamental ways. I became more assertive, less willing to silence my concerns for the sake of keeping peace. I learned to trust my instincts when something felt wrong. Most importantly, I discovered strength I never knew I possessed. "You're not the same person you were a year ago," Margaret observed over coffee one morning. "You're stronger now." "I had to be," I replied. "I didn't have a choice." "That's not true," she countered. "You could have given up, made excuses for Brian, let him take everything. Many people would have, but you fought back." The question of forgiveness remained complex and unresolved. Some well-meaning friends and family urged me to forgive Brian for my own peace of mind. Others insisted I should never trust or speak to him again. Neither extreme felt right to me. I came to understand that forgiveness doesn't necessarily mean reconciliation. I could work toward releasing the anger and bitterness for my own well-being without pretending the betrayal never happened. I could acknowledge the factors that might have contributed to Brian's behavior: his financial pressures, his wife's materialism, perhaps even underlying mental health issues, without excusing what he had done. I also realized that forgiveness wasn't a single decision, but a process that would likely continue for years. Some days, I felt compassion for the troubled man my son had become. Other days, the hurt felt too raw for anything but anger. What helped most was focusing on my own healing rather than on Brian's redemption. I couldn't control whether he ever truly understood the harm he had caused or made genuine changes in his life. I could only control my own choices, my own growth, my own future. The life lessons I gained through this painful journey were hard-won, but valuable. I learned that financial independence is crucial at every age, that trust requires verification, even with family, that strength often comes from unexpected places, and that helping others can be a powerful path to healing. As I approached my 63rd birthday, 1 year after discovering Brian's betrayal, I found myself in a place I could never have imagined. I was more financially secure with new protections in place. I had a broader, deeper support network of friends and family. I had a new purpose as a mentor to other seniors navigating complex family dynamics. Most importantly, I had reclaimed my power, my voice, and my future. The bank manager's words had come true in more ways than one. Brian no longer owned any part of my life, my decisions, or my self-worth. The greatest pension isn't what's in my bank account, but the wealth of wisdom I've gained about standing up for myself. And that's something no one can ever take from me. Have you ever had to stand up to someone who is taking advantage of you? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story touched you, or might help someone you know, please hit that subscribe button and share it with them. Remember, we're stronger when we share our experiences and support each other through difficult times. Thank you for listening, and I wish you the courage to protect what's rightfully yours, no matter who tries to take it from you.